If you've ever sat down to create and you've felt pressure instead of inspiration, then this video is for you. So I was inspired to talk about this from a Rick Rubin quote, which is, take art seriously without going about it in a serious way. And what he's really talking about here is keeping a balance of play and discipline in our creative process. And as I've reflected on this, I've noticed these are both difficult things to cultivate. And we can have times in our creative journey where we have one of them and we might be lacking the other, or other times it's actually quite difficult to cultivate both of these. They might both be lacking. And I've had all of these situations over my life when it comes to creativity. And the first thing, when I reflect on play, I think back to when I actually started discovering music as a great joy for me, which was when I was about 13 years old. I had an electric guitar and I would spend hours in my room just playing along to my favorite music, which was Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, all of this stuff. All of the guitar gods basically were big inspirations on me when I started playing guitar. And I didn't have any concept of what I should be doing, a right and wrong. I would just sit down, turn my guitar up and my amp really loud and just play along and express myself. And that became the source of actually my enjoyment for music, was just discovery and finding my way around the guitar and just playing what felt good. And over time, when I did that for many hours and many hours a day over years, I did actually discover a way of playing that felt natural to me and that felt like it was an expression of actually what I wanted to play or say on the guitar. And perhaps it wasn't the most orthodox, perfect technique, but that was the source of my great joy when it came to music. And at that time, I thought, okay, well, I love this. I want to pursue this. I want to do this as something more seriously. So I studied music. I went to university and got a bachelor in music. And that was the time where it went from being just this fun thing I did in my room to something which I had to start applying structure and discipline to. And that was also the first time where I got a sense or an idea of what I should be doing. I guess that word should started creeping into my music, essentially, and my creativity. And that was also the time where I got this first sense of what discipline should look like according to how everyone else was doing it. People were spending hours and hours a day practicing their instruments, becoming very skilled and honing in their craft, and they were doing really, really well. And I was a bit, I was confused, or didn't know how some people seem to have this innate ability to just spend hours on things. It seemed like they had this endless supply of discipline. And I used to find that incredibly difficult to spend so many hours working on these things. And so I also developed this sense of discipline is hard. And that, I think, affected things a lot further down the line too. And by the time I got to the end of jazz school, I realized that actually I've kind of lost touch with what play is for me. And especially over the years as well, the older you get, the more things become structured, the more things become an expectation of how they should or shouldn't be. And I've actually found play has been something I've had to actively cultivate to bring back into my creative process. And so the three things that have been most helpful for me for bringing back play, one of them is a book recommendation. So there's a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And this is a very famous book. She talks about this practice in there called the morning pages. And many well-known artists have used the morning pages. There are probably thousands of videos online of people talking about this practice. It's quite well known. It's when you wake up in the morning, you write for 3 pages, stream of conscious. You don't take your pen off the page. There are no rules about what you should write. It's basically the only rule is you don't stop writing for that time. So that's a well-known practice. She actually has another practice in her book, which is called Artist's Dates. And that is something that she's also very clear that you should be doing these regularly. And not many people actually talk about the artist's date, but essentially what it is having a time every week where you take your inner artist or your inner child on an experience which it brings back alive a sense of joy or a sense of fun. And so the idea is you do something that it might be an activity from your childhood that you used to love doing that you haven't done for a long time. So baking cookies, or it might be going to a museum or going to your favorite place in nature or a secondhand bookshop. It's going to be a personal thing for everyone. But the key thing is that it's something that brings that sense of inner joy alive, or that inner artist, that sense of curiosity that we used to have when we were a child, and the way we used to explore that. And another part of that book, The Artist's Way, is that she prompts you to do a lot of journaling through that book, where you actually discover what these things are. You remember what those things were when you were a child, these activities. And so as you're going along, they come to your attention and they become ideas to re-engage with those on the artist's date. So I've found both of these things have been really effective for me actually, as ways to prioritize that and keep that alive. And if you focus on cultivating that in other activities, I've found that also naturally feeds into the creative process as well. So that's something which I find as a regular practice is actually, it can be really helpful sometimes. And the other thing is, the third thing for cultivating play is leading with curiosity and making curiosity a real habit with everything, both in terms of the creative process, but also just outside of the creative process, just getting curious, asking questions, and just being open to seeing things in a different way. I find that is a muscle, to look at things differently, to explore things differently, and that translates directly into the creative process, because especially if you've been creating for a particular way for a period of time, that can actually start to become a barrier, or it can become difficult to see outside of that structure, because we're just so used to seeing things that way. And that is something that I'm definitely struggling with sometimes. I sit down maybe with a blank page or maybe with my guitar, and I go to the same chords that have become a bit of a habit. And curiosity, I've found, is a way of just being curious to see what else might be a different way to express this feeling that I haven't tried before, or being open to exploring a way someone else did it that resonated with me, and how can I apply that in my situation. The thing with curiosity, or with play rather, is that isn't really enough in and of itself. So I've had many periods where I've played around, I've started pieces of music, I've started songs, and you can pretty easily end up with a lot of threads that you've started that are not finished. I'm sure every artist is familiar with that. And it's that classic thing of, you hear producers, there's lots of videos about how to get out of the loop, the 4-bar loop or whatever, or how to get out of the first verse trap, if it's in the songwriting, where you write your first verse and you can't continue. And this is where the discipline aspect of creativity comes in, and that I've found has also required for me some very specific effort to cultivate that, because if I'm honest, discipline doesn't come naturally to me. I have to be very intentional about bringing it into different parts of my life, so that it will also come into my creative process as well. And I actually have another book recommendation for cultivating discipline, and it's called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. So this is where he specifically names resistance as the biggest barrier that stops us from making art, basically. And resistance definitely has been a very real thing for me, still is to this day. And he talks about it in a very straight up, candid way, but he also reflects a lot on his own life. He talks how resistance has been a barrier for stopping him from essentially doing the thing that is his soul's calling, really. And he talks about shadow careers and all sorts of things that we do in order to avoid going through the resistance and sort of working through that. And so doing the work is basically his his cure for it, is just showing up every day and doing the work. But it's just a really good book, the way he's written it. It has a way of kind of waking up this awareness around how that, well, for me anyway, how that was playing a part in my life. And it's a very motivating book, which is one of those ones that I go back to and read again and again. Another tool for cultivating discipline is collaborating to commit. And so what I mean by that, a way that I've done this in my life is this maybe 10 years ago, something like that. There was a producer who I really respected. I listened to some of the work that he'd done, and I really loved it. And I had a thought that I would love to work with him. I'd love to get him to produce a record for me. And so I inquired, not thinking he would reply, and he did. And we set up a time, and during the meeting, he said, yep, okay, let's do it. And I said to him, well, I don't know how I'm going to afford to pay for this. And he said, don't worry, we'll work it out. And we locked in a date. And essentially that was the motion from which everything else came. And what I found was, when I really locked in a date and I committed, and I was in commitment with someone else in collaboration, it was a lot easier for me to apply discipline, because that became a very high priority, because there were a lot of stakes on the line with that. And I found externally, in terms of bringing my band together, everything came together once I made that commitment. And internally, having the discipline and the mindset sort of was a lot easier to cultivate, because I had already set something in motion with someone else. So that is another great tool for cultivating discipline, is collaborating with someone who you really respect and who you admire, and letting that be an impetus for sort of aligning your priorities. And naturally, I find discipline it tends to just come a lot more easily when those other factors are in play. And there's one more trick which I'm going to talk about for discipline, and that's an idea I actually got from Greg McKeown, who is the author of Essentialism, but he's got another great book called Effortless. He has this concept of having a minimal and maximum effort for a particular thing. So, for example, if it's songwriting, you might say, okay, every day my minimum is 10 minutes. So your minimum has to be something that is easy to commit to, that is not going to be a burden to sustain over time. And then your maximum might be, let's say, an hour. So you know that every day you're either going to spend at the bare minimum 10 minutes, which is achievable on your most challenging, busy day. And then at a maximum, you're going to do an hour. And the reason you set a maximum is because it stops you from burning out. Because sometimes there can be this whole inspiration thing where you work for hours and hours and hours and hours, and then it's just a crash and burn, and we burn out, and we don't actually follow that up with consistency. And that is something that I did recently, actually, as a way to basically start doing these videos. I did 10 minutes every single day of just filming myself to get over the discomfort of being in front of a camera. And I did that for 30 days in a row, and it was actually a really powerful practice that has enabled me to now start doing something that is a bit more uncomfortable, which is actually releasing videos to the world. So that's a recent example of how I've applied that for myself. So yeah, those are my takeaways around all of that, and so I hope some of that has been useful. And I'll sum these things all up in the description as well, so that you can easily actually refer back to them. But if you have watched this far, then thank you, and I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, because I'm just starting this channel. It's early days for me, and if this stuff is resonating with you, then I would love your support. Cool. I will see you next time.